UFOs have recently been causing a frenzy worldwide, even making the headlines of mainstream news media, which was not the case just a few years ago. But while some of the most attention is focused on sightings in Western countries, unknown to many, Zimbabwe has been a hotspot for this strange phenomena for many years. In fact, some of the most compelling sightings on record come from this very country. Welcome to Gemini Blessed TV. Today we're going to be covering down the top 10 alleged UFO and alien sightings in Zimbabwe. If you're new to the channel, we publish new content regularly, so hit the subscribe button for more exciting videos. Number 10. Bulawayo, 1953. At number 10, we travel back to the early days of modern UFO sightings. On June 24, 1947, the modern UFO era began just after the World War II, when a pilot named Kenneth Arnold reported seeing 9 flying saucers moving at incredible speed near Mount Rainier, Washington. These sightings sparked a wave of UFO reports worldwide. Fast forward 6 years to December 1953 in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe, then known as Rhodesia, one of the most historic UFO photographs was taken. This picture, showing what appeared to be an unidentified flying object in the sky, would go on to become one of the most famous UFO images in history. The Bulawayo photograph has been used by several major news outlets including BBC and ABC News as a prime example of UFO sightings. Number 9. Mashonaland East, 1991. Coming in at number 9, we highlight how Zimbabwe's UFO phenomenon has garnered such attention that it's probably the only African country to have had a dedicated UFO newsletter. This was thanks to Cynthia Hind, an author and UFO researcher based in Zimbabwe, who devoted much of her life to investigating UFO cases across Africa. She published books like UFOs, African Encounters, and UFOs over Africa, and ran the UFO Afri News series from July 1988 until July 2000, just before her passing. Appointed as the Continental Coordinator for Africa by MUFON in 1981, she held the position until her death. Whenever a significant UFO case came up, she would personally travel to the site to conduct a full-scale investigation, often with the help of local advisors. One such case, reported by Cynthia in 1991, took place at Dartmoor Farm in Mashonaland, Zimbabwe. On a Friday night in June that year, a man named Colin and his companions were performing a traditional Nyau dance on open ground near the farm. Suddenly, they saw a strange cigar-shaped white light moving at high speed from south to north. The object was discharging red flames from the rear. Colin estimated it was flying about 100 to 150 meters above the ground, passing directly overhead and illuminating the area as bright as daylight. He recalled, "They thought we would fear them, but instead we beat the drums even harder and sang even louder." By they, Colin was referring to ghosts or witches. That Sunday, a man living 2 kilometers south of the farm claimed that witches had played a disturbing trick on him that same night. He wasn't sure what they intended, but he remembered that the light came from the direction of the cemetery, flooding his room with light. Coincidentally, the cemetery was also to the south, the same direction the light traveled. Only after hearing that Colin and his companions saw the same light did the men seem to relax. Interestingly, Colin went on to live to visit his family in Murewa that week. When he mentioned the sightings to his relatives, they confirmed that they had seen the same light, which eventually led to the incident being reported to Cynthia Hind. Number 8. Chipinge 2021. Interestingly, 30 years after the Mashonaland UFO sighting in 1991, a similar event would take place, this time in Chipinge, Zimbabwe. On Friday, March 19, 2021, a 47-year-old man named Richmond Muyambo had a close encounter with death when his motorbike crashed into a wattle plantation after coming face to face with a blindingly bright, unidentified flying object flying toward him. Richmond explained that he was riding from clear water when he heard an unusual sound as he approached the Chipinge town turnoff. At first, he thought the sound came from trucks carrying wattle poles, but suddenly he was blinded by a strange bright light in the sky. Initially, he thought he had come face to face with a ghost, but then he realized the object looked more like a rocket with a fire at the back. He tried to focus on riding, but the sound grew louder, causing him to lose control of the motorbike and crashing into the wattle plantation. He thought the object was crashing into him and feared that death had visited him. At that moment, there was a deafening explosion which occurred 6 times. Richmond lost consciousness and only regained it after about 30 minutes. He explained what happened, insisting that he was completely sober, and to his surprise, others in the community had also seen the UFO. He suffered a leg injury in the incident and was admitted to Chipinge District Hospital. Other villagers confirmed that they had heard the UFO flying close to their homes, causing widespread panic. The story was covered by several news outlets across the country, and the Meteorological Services Department confirmed that the strange object had indeed been witnessed, but no official statement was released as they believed it wasn't weather related. Although many believed the object had crashed somewhere within the district due to the explosions, no physical evidence or debris was ever found. Number 7. Harare, 1996. This case was reported to Cynthia Hind in 1996 from a reliable source. The witness was a disabled white man who lived on a farm with his family and regularly drove his own car. On Sunday night, October 2, 1996, between 7:30 and 8 p.m., he was driving home along the old Bulawayo Road, which leads to Lilifordia School. As he turned onto the road toward his aunt's house, who he stayed with, he noticed a bright light descending from the sky. As it came closer, he realized it was disc-shaped and suspected it might be a flying saucer. He pulled his car over and watched as the object landed in a nearby field. A door opened on the side of the craft and 2 men in shiny black overalls climbed out from the dome at the top. At the same time, another car approached from the opposite direction and also stopped. A black Zimbabwean man got out and both witnesses watched in amazement. The figures were too far away for them to see their faces. Suddenly, the men seemed to become aware of being watched. Folding steps appeared and they quickly went back inside the craft. The door closed and the machine began to light up, especially the reddish pink area underneath. The black Zimbabwean man then ran over to the witness and shouted, "Get out of here! Get out of here quickly! Those are Tsotsis over there!" Although Tsotsis is the local word for thieves, Cynthia Hind speculated that he might have actually said Tokoloshi, a mischievous dwarf-like creature from Southern African folklore, which has been interestingly compared to alien entities in other cases. Many African witnesses at the time, unfamiliar with the Western concept of UFOs, often described such sightings as ghosts, Tokoloshis, or creatures of the night. The black Zimbabwean man ran back to his car and both men drove off in a hurry. When the witness arrived home, his aunt noted that he was visibly shaken and shocked. Cynthia Hind later visited the site to investigate. While no radiation or metal detection evidence was found, she did discover a large bent log on the ground, which could have been caused by lightning, but we'll never really know for sure. Number 6. Bindura, 1996. Earlier that year, Cynthia Hind, Zimbabwe's renowned UFO researcher, documented a bizarre case involving an extraterrestrial entity. She received a letter in May 1996 from a 17-year-old O-level student, Lloyd T. Karambakua, attending Herman Minor Secondary School. On the night of 5 March 1996, Lloyd went to bed at his usual time around 8 p.m. Living in Chipadze, a township 10 kilometers outside Bindura, Lloyd preferred to wake up in the early hours to study when it was quiet and undisturbed. He awoke at approximately 1 a.m. and began studying, but soon became aware of a continuous clicking sound coming from outside somewhere on the road in the distance. Initially, he thought it might be someone using a cordless phone, but as the sound advanced toward him, the clicking noise remained persistent. Fearful but curious, Lloyd considered going outside to investigate, but his anxiety held him back. After some hesitation, he finally decided to open the front door to explore. As Lloyd reached the road, the sound stopped and there was nothing in sight. Determined to find out what was causing the noise, he ventured further, but the sound suddenly resumed, this time coming from near the women's training center across the road from his house. However, the view was obscured by the building, preventing him from seeing the source. Frightened, he returned to his home, leaving the front door open, not locking it out of anxiety and curiosity. Turning off the light to hide, Lloyd lay down on his bed listening. After around 10 to 12 minutes, the clicking sound returned, now seemingly closer, about 20 to 30 meters away. Lloyd, still nervous but determined, slowly opened the front door again and cautiously crept outside. He hid behind the thick hedge in front of his house. From his hiding spot, he was shocked to see a mysterious figure roughly 2 meters away from him. The figure was completely white, short and fast moving. It stood about 1.5 meters tall with a head shaped like a rugby ball or an egg. On his back, Lloyd noticed a satchel with an aerial extending from it and a small red light attached. The continuous clicking noise seemed to be emanating from this strange being. Paralyzed with fear, Lloyd watched as the entity moved away. When it had distanced itself, he quickly ran back into the house, threw himself under the blankets and remained hidden. The clicking sound persisted for a while longer, coming and going before it was finally interrupted by the sound of a car engine revving in the distance. The next morning around 5:45 a.m., Lloyd ventured out to the road to see if anything had been left behind. While there were no physical objects, he noticed unusual footprints in the sand, footprints he later sketched for Cynthia Hind during an investigation. When Lloyd arrived at school that morning, he shared his strange experience with his friends, asking if anyone had heard anything strange during the night. Although no one else had woken up during the event, one friend suggested that Lloyd may have encountered a UFO. Lloyd also learned that a security guard stationed at the women's training center might have witnessed the strange figure as well. Though he didn't know the guard's name, he knew the guard was employed by a security company in Bindura. Cynthia later visited the security company and spoke with Constance Savanu, the supervisor. To Cynthia's surprise, Constance immediately recognized the date and event, explaining, "Oh, that's the guard who saw the ghost." The guard, a woman named Kambudzai Gweshe, had since left the company to work for the cotton company in Bindura. According to Constance, Kambudzai confirmed hearing a disturbing clicking sound between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. on the night of March 6, 1996. She described the sound as unpleasant, similar to the alarm of an elevator. The sound came and went over a period of 20 minutes. Curious, Kambudzai eventually went to investigate and saw a small white figure moving slowly along the road. This figure was unpleasant to look at and frightened her. It had an area on its back and was moving eastwards. As the entity moved, its body began to glow with rainbow colors, a strange sight that deeply unsettled Kambudzai. She quickly retreated to the training center building and hid inside until she was sure it had left. The next morning, Kambudzai reported the encounter to her employers, refusing to take any more night shifts. Soon after, she resigned from the company and sought day work at the cotton company. Cynthia Hind concluded that both Lloyd and Kambudzai had witnessed the same strange entity that night. Number 5. Mutare, 1981. On the evening of August 15, 1981, a strange and unexplainable event occurred at La Rochelle, a forestry commission stationed approximately 9 kilometers from Mutare, Zimbabwe. 20 black forestry workers, including laborers and foremen of the Shona tribe, returned from the fields at around 6 p.m. when they were startled by the sight of a large fireball rolling across the grounds. The group was led by Clifford Muchena, who, like the others, was in complete shock. They observed the fireball, which was approximately 12 meters in diameter, move from one side of the lawn to the other. The glowing sphere ascended the sloping lawn and began climbing the wall of an observation tower attached to the main house. Clifford recounted in disbelief. It walked up the wall of the tower and entered the top window, then it burst into flame. Clifford immediately ran to ring the warning bell at the side of the house, attempting to summon one of the game wardens. As the bell rang, the fireball suddenly descended the tower, rolled past Clifford, and again burst into flames as it reached a nearby outbuilding known as the Fantasy, which previously housed the estate's prized orchards. While Clifford ran toward the building in an attempt to extinguish the flames, he noticed 3 figures standing nearby, their backs turned toward him. Initially believing one of the figures to be his supervisor, Andrew Connolly, Clifford called out, "Mr. Conley! Mr. Conley!" As the figures slowly turned around, Clifford was overwhelmed by the intense light radiating from them. The brightness was so powerful that he had to shield his eyes with his hands and he could not make out their faces. The figures were dressed in shiny metallic overalls, unlike anything Clifford had seen before. The intensity of the light forced Clifford to his knees, where he remained paralyzed in fear, unable to look up until the light eventually faded. When he dared to look again, both the fireball and the mysterious figures had vanished without a trace. Clifford later described his experience, admitting he was terrified the entire time. Meanwhile, other witnesses, including women and children from the compound, had fled into the bush out of fear. It took some time before they could be convinced to return to the area. Cynthia Hind managed to interview several of the witnesses involved, including Clifford Muchena, Naison Sambindi, and Eunice Kachiti. The witnesses were unanimously convinced that they had encountered the spirits of their ancestors, specifically a Shavi, a lost spirit who had not found its way home because its descendants had failed to perform the necessary rituals.
And I said, "Clifford, who did you think they were?" And he said, "I knew who they were. They were my ancestors."
The idea that these figures could be anything other than ancestral spirits was unthinkable to them, as they had no knowledge of UFOs or extraterrestrial beings. Cynthia, curious about the details, pointed out the strangeness of the figures' attire, remarking that their ancestors wore traditional furs and skins, yet these beings appeared to be dressed in shiny silver coveralls.
But your ancestors wore fur and monkey skins and lion's teeth. They didn't wear silver suits.
Clifford Simple's response was,
Well, times change.
Number 4. Mutare, 1988. Stuart, a 26-year-old primary school teacher, experienced an extraordinary event while walking home from the General Hospital in Mutare. His route took him along Pasture Avenue near Hospital Hill and through a polo cross field where horses were kept. Around 7 to 7:30 p.m., Stuart encountered something unexpected. Hovering approximately 100 meters above the ground was a bluish-gray rugby ball-shaped object with spikes coming out from its sides. Stuart was paralyzed with fear and confusion. He was unable to speak or move, and the entire area felt strangely silent. Nearby, a little girl played on the veranda of a house, but she didn't respond when Stuart shouted for her to look at the UFO. Despite his effort to run, Stuart found himself moving in slow motion. The unidentified object hovered directly above him as he ran towards the polo crossfield, where the horses stood still, seemingly unaffected by the object's presence. Stuart described the object emitting a high-pitched wheezing sound similar to an electric generator or motor, although it was almost silent. Lights in green, blue, and an orangey-red hue flashed around the object, and Stuart found himself stuck to the ground, unable to move. After what felt like an eternity, the object flew higher into the sky, eventually shooting across the sky to the west in the direction of Feruca Oil Refinery. Once the object disappeared, the horses scattered in all directions, and Stuart found himself sweating as he ran home. He arrived home in a state of panic, banging on the door and shouting for his wife, children, and his 12-year-old brother. The next day, Stuart contacted the local newspaper, the Manica Post, to report the sighting. Unfortunately, they dismissed his story as a hoax, which greatly upset him. Even some of his friends found it hard to believe, although his wife and workmates took him seriously. Strangely, while he felt as though he had been standing in the field for hours, only about 45 to 50 minutes had passed when he returned home. Following this encounter, Stuart began to experience strange phenomena. He started having vivid dreams about floating across the same area the sighting occurred. Even more disturbingly, he developed the ability to foresee accidents and deaths, which he confided only to his wife. Stuart's behavior also changed dramatically. He began drinking heavily and struggled with an increase in sexual activity, which became a personal issue for him. Additionally, he developed a persistent fungus in his ear, which no medication or home remedy could fully cure. Oddly, his ear would itch intensely whenever something bad was about to happen, as though the fungus was alive. In 1995, 7 years after the incident, Stuart was sent for an ECG and X-rays due to a suspected heart problem. While his heart was fine, the doctor discovered that Stuart was missing a rib on his left side, something that he had never noted before. Stuart had no recollection of any accident or trauma that could explain the missing rib. Though the doctor suggested that he might have been born that way, Stuart was adamant that previous X-rays had never shown the missing rib. Stuart, a devout Christian who regularly prayed and read the Bible, found it difficult to reconcile these experiences. He did not tell his doctor about the UFO incident, obviously, fearing disbelief. After the encounter, Stuart frequently drew the object on the board at school, on the ground for his friends, and on paper whenever he had the chance to record the sighting. Though he had no memory of being taken aboard the craft, his wife confirmed that the entire episode lasted about 30 minutes. In 1998, UFO researcher Cynthia Hind returned to Mutare to investigate further and attempt to locate Stewart's old X-rays. Unfortunately, the Central Medical Registry could not find any of his previous medical records, as X-rays were typically destroyed after a few years if not claimed by the patient. Despite the lack of physical evidence, Stewart's experience and its aftermath left a lasting impact on him and those close to him. Number 3. Vuma Masvingo Road, 1974. This case made international waves in the UFO community when it was reported, even hitting the headlines of the January 1977 issue of the US-based Fate magazine. On May 31, 1974, married couple Peter and Frances McNorman set off for Salisbury, Rhodesia, now Harare, Zimbabwe, heading to Durban, South Africa in their well-kept Peugeot 404, complete with retreaded tires. At around 2:15 a.m. near Mvuma, they spotted a metallic-looking figure on the roadside, initially mistaking it for a police officer. Assuming it was a speed trap, they slowed to under 70 miles per hour, then resumed speed when nothing followed. A few minutes later, Peter spotted a strange light, initially thinking it was a distant house light. But as it drew nearer, it was clear that the light was too high. They were not too much concerned and assumed that maybe it was a helicopter. Gradually, the light seemed to come closer to them and it was keeping pace with the car. Soon, their headlights began to dim and a bright shadow-casting light from the above illuminated the road. Peter said later that it was like driving under a huge neon light. Peter soon realized that he had lost all control over the car. It was accelerating on its own, ignoring his attempts to brake or steer. Francis sensed something was wrong, noting the sharp decrease in temperature in the car, and they pulled on extra jerseys to keep warm. They passed a trading store and noticed an African bus parking with all lights on but strangely empty. Strangely, 2 more abandoned buses appeared in the following miles. About 6 miles from Masvingo, the object suddenly shot off over the horizon like a meteor. Peter found himself in the control of the car again and drove very slowly for the last few miles, as there was still barely a glow from the headlamps. After refueling and checking the car at an all-night gas station in Masvingo, they continued toward Beitbridge. Strangely, the roads were deserted even though it was typically busy. Not long after, Peter noticed 2 lights reappear in the sky, keeping pace with the car, one overhead and another slightly behind. Once again, Peter had no control over the car, which was speeding forward at speeds over 160 km per hour. Both of them knew something was very off. For now, the road was dead straight with swamps, large expanses of water, and high wet-looking grass on either side, which led Francis to ask whether they were on the right road, as the road from Masvingo to Beitbridge is very curved and twisted. On top of this, it was almost completely silent in the car. There was no engine hum or road noise, which added to their unease. Peter said he felt as if he were in a coma and found it difficult to keep track of time. At around 6:15 a.m., Francis saw the objects high above, smaller and distant, then drifted off to sleep. Peter couldn't recall the rest of the journey until they reached the Limpopo River border at 7:30 a.m. The couple chose to keep the strange events of the night to themselves. At the next fuel stop, another surprise awaited. They had traveled nearly 200 miles, but their gas tank was still full, needing nearly less than a quarter gallon of fuel. Checking the trip counter, which Peter had reset in Masvingo, he was stunned to see it read just over 10 miles. For hours while the object hovered above, they'd used no fuel and registered almost no mileage. 7 months later in Durban, Peter would undergo hypnotic regression by Dr. Paul Obertik and was asked a series of questions which would reveal some shocking details. Hypnotic regression is a therapeutic technique that uses hypnosis to help people access buried memories and relive past experiences. Peter described how, as Francis slept, an alien appeared in the backseat and sat there the entire journey. Peter explained that 12 kilometers outside Fort Victoria, they saw 2 craft together. The one above sent 2 beams of light into the motor car, which gave the car a complete mind of its own sense of power, direction, speed, control, steering ability, lighting, everything. A simulated screen was put in front of the windscreen, the side windows, and the back window of the motor car. It came from somewhere, but he didn't know where. Later, Peter described an apparent out-of-body experience during which he found himself inside a large, 3-level silver-grey saucer. Under hypnosis, Peter explained that the craft's lowest level housed the power unit. The second had engineering and living quarters, and the top had a cockpit and control center. Interestingly, there was a special abduction unit on board the craft, an empty room into which abducted humans could be taken, where they could be induced to believe they was true in a simulated Earth surrounding. Peter was then taken to the sick bay on board for a medical exam and recalled seeing his wife and others, both black and white, in a trance-like state. It appeared that their purpose is to influence the course of Earth without making direct interference. Number 2, Nyanga Mountains, 1959. Next at number 2 is the haunting story of Credo Mutwa, a respected Zulu traditional healer and writer who claimed to have had a disturbing encounter in Zimbabwe's Nyanga Mountains in 1959. According to Mutwa, he had been sent by his teacher Mrs. Moyo, a Ndebele healer, to gather a special herb in the Nyanga Mountains to heal a sick initiate. On a hot afternoon while searching for the herb, Mutwa recalls feeling a sudden drop in temperature around him. Out of nowhere, a bright blue mist appeared around him, blocking the landscape from view. The next thing he knew, he found himself in a strange place, what he described as a tunnel lined with silver-grey metal similar to a mine. Mutwa was lying on a large heavy table with his trousers and boots missing. Unable to move, he saw dull, grey creatures approaching him. Although afraid, he couldn't move his arms or legs. One creature placed its hand over his mouth, silencing him as he screamed in pain from a sharp sensation in his left thigh. He endured the pain until one of the beings placed a hand on his forehead, calming him. Soon, the pain was replaced by strange visions of half-destroyed cities he recognized, with buildings having their tops blown away. He was taken to other rooms, seeing things he couldn't understand and other beings lying on similar tables, including a white man who smelled of sweat, urine, and fear. As he walked past, they briefly locked eyes before Mutwa found himself back in the bush, his trousers missing, with painful swelling in his left thigh. He also felt a severe pain in his private parts, which worsened when he tried to relieve himself. Villagers later found him and brought him back to Mrs. Moyo's village. Strangely, the villagers weren't shocked by his story. Instead, they said he was lucky to return alive, as similar strange events had happened, with people often vanishing for good on the mountain. In 1960, while delivering parcels in Johannesburg, a white man stopped him and angrily demanded to know where they had met before.
The white man recognized me just as I recognized him. We were in hell together.
The man, who was visibly disturbed, turned away and left without another word.
It was one of the strangest events of my life.
Nyanga Mountains has long had a sinister reputation as the mountain that swallows people, with numerous reports of people disappearing without a trace. Perhaps most famously in 1981, the two teenage daughters of teacher N.D.P. Masaya, a government official, vanished on the mountain, leaving behind no evidence despite extensive air and ground searches. A few years later, a 12-year-old schoolboy, Robert August, also disappeared during a school trip to Nyanga, leaving no trace. His teacher was so overcome by grief that he eventually took his own life. Credo's experience may sound surreal, but Nyanga's history is indeed full of chilling mysteries. But as we dig deeper, one especially strange story appears to validate Credo Muto's claims, coming from an unlikely source, the CIA. In 1970, US intelligence was alarmed to learn that the Soviet Union had begun heavily investing in parapsychology research, reportedly with a budget of over $21 million spreading across 20 institutions. In response, the CIA launched its own program, Scarnet, which kicked off the study of remote viewing, the idea that individuals could visualize distant locations or objects with their minds alone. Remote viewing research officially began in 1972 at the Stanford Research Institute, led by Hal Puthoff and funded by the CIA. At its peak, the program employed over 22 remote viewers, a mix of military and civilian personnel. Now you may be wondering what remote viewing has to do with Zimbabwe. Well, in 1973, Pat Price, a former police officer from California and renowned as one of the most effective remote viewers, brought a file to Puthoff's office with a stunning claim. According to Price, he had identified 4 extraterrestrial bases on Earth through remote viewing, each hidden within a remote mountain. His list included Mount Hayes in Alaska, Mount Perdido in Spain, Mount Zill in Australia, and Mount Nyangani in Zimbabwe. Price claimed that each location had a specific purpose, and he described them as heavily shielded from detection and mutually supportive of each other. Even more unsettling, he described their technology as highly advanced and said these beings used thought transfer to control humans. Former CIA Director Stansfield Turner once described Price as a man who could see what was going on anywhere in the world through his psychic powers. In the 1980s, documents from Price's research were shared with Skip Atwater, who later led Project H200, a secret operation under the Stargate project. Over time, several viewers in Project H200 were tasked with verifying Price's findings, confirming the presence of the bases and describing bizarre characteristics. The data suggested that the bases were not always occupied and appeared to communicate with an object in deep space. Remote viewers described the deep space platform as ancient yet equipped with new technology. For years, the remote viewing program went through layers of oversight, proving its worth repeatedly to continue receiving funding each year. The Stargate project was ultimately terminated and declassified in 1995 when the CIA concluded it didn't contribute substantially to intelligence operations. 17 pages of Price's original file were made published in the 2024 Project H200 book by Skip Atwater. Pat Price, who died under mysterious circumstances in 1975, left a legacy of questions. His findings pointed to a covert manipulation of humans that matched with Credo Muto's descriptions, suggesting that Mount Nyangani may indeed conceal something far beyond our understanding. Number 1. Ruwa, 1994. On Friday morning, September 16, 1994, the area school in Ruwa, Zimbabwe experienced a phenomenon that has since become one of the most notable incidents in UFO history. At 10 a.m., the children were outside playing while their teachers attended a staff meeting. A few minutes into their break, the kids noticed something unusual near the edge of their playing field, an area covered in long grass and thorn bushes. Other children then described seeing a silver saucer-shaped object flying across the sky before landing near the trees. They described seeing two beings about 4 feet tall, dressed in tight black bodysuits with narrow, pale faces and large black eyes that had an almost plastic appearance. Many children ran away, but some of the older kids stayed to observe as the beings moved closer. One student described their movement as bouncy, almost like they were running in slow motion or moving on the moon. The kids were just a few feet away and described the scene as glitchy, as if the craft and beings were flickering. One of the figures eventually stopped directly in front of them, and in interviews, the children over and over again focused on its eyes that they found they couldn't look away from. After looking into the being's eyes, several children reported receiving telepathic messages. One fifth grader said that they were warned about something that's going to happen, emphasizing that pollution must not be. The only adult outside was the tuck shop attendant, who was soon overwhelmed by the kids' stories. They claimed to have seen 3 or 4 objects coming through the power lines and landing in the bushes. UFO investigator Cynthia Hind was one of the first to document this incident, describing it as one of the most exciting UFO stories of that or any other year. She recorded the children's testimonies, which came from a diverse group of Black African, Asian and white Zimbabwean children, and noted that they interpreted the event through their own cultural backgrounds. For instance, some black children thought the beings resembled Rikwambo or Tokoloshi's supernatural goblins in Shona and Ndebele folklore, causing them to burst into tears, fearing they would be eaten. After break ended, the kids shared their experience with teachers who were skeptical. But the story spread to parents, many of whom visited the school the next day, eager to discuss it with faculty. With pressure from parents and Hind's involvement, the school asked the kids to draw what they saw. The children's drawings were strangely consistent, and although they interpreted the figures differently based on their backgrounds, their descriptions of the craft and beings were remarkably similar. Hind believed that the diverse interpretations, combined with similar visual accounts, strengthened the validity of the story. Hind's involvement brought the story to the attention of Dr. John Mack, a Harvard psychiatrist and Pulitzer Prize-winning author known for his research on UFO sightings and alien abductions. Dr. Mack, who had even appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show, flew from the US to Zimbabwe in November to interview the children.
We're talking today with Harvard University psychiatrist John Mack, who studied the cases of about 100 people, at least, who claim that they've been abducted by aliens.
While some teachers and parents were skeptical, he was able to convince them not to dismiss the children's experience as lies. Mack was intrigued by the environmental warnings the children reported, similar to the messages given to other so-called experiences that he had studied.
Now, if these are real experiences, what is going on? What's the source of these experiences?
That's the question. What's going on?
The days and weeks following brought additional witness accounts. A local woman reported seeing an orange glow over a chicken run.
I just saw a glow over my chicken run, a very orange glow.
And in Kariba, a man claimed to see a glowing object transform into 2 orange-red balls in the sky.
Can you just tell us what happened the other night at Kariba?
We suddenly looked up and we saw this thing coming over the top of the hill. But then one thing we noticed about it was the lack of sound. In total, I would say about 14 people saw this, in our group anyway.
In May 2022, new photos published by the Daily Mail revealed impressions left in the ground at Aerial School. Photographer Ganda Hofer, who assisted Hind, found wedge-shaped imprints in the hard soil and oval shapes flattened in the grass, allegedly left by the craft. Initially, Hofer couldn't find anything, but he later learned that some children reported sightings on both Thursday, September 15 and Friday, September 16. The first sighting took place at the opposite end of the playground, where he eventually found the impressions. Almost 30 years later, many of the children stand by their accounts of that day. Whether or not the kids were believed or even listened to seemed to have a big impact on whether or not they were traumatized by the memory. Some of the local kids, for example, who grew up in cultures that believed in spirits, seemed to fare better.
Seeing an alien brought me to a place where I did find my own African belief systems and culture and spirituality.
Emily Trim, whose missionary father prohibited his children from discussing the incident, returned with her family to Canada shortly afterward. Over the years, she opened up about the challenges she faced in relationships and the flashbacks of the event. Having stood just feet away from one of the beings, Emily believed she received messages during the encounter, which she later expressed through her art. She described her work as a tangible representation of those messages, sharing it with the world as a creative manifestation of her experience. Sadly, her family recently announced that Emily passed away in November after a courageous battle with cancer. Her story and art continue to inspire those captivated by a unique encounter. In a documentary on Netflix, Encounters, the current headmistress, Miss Bates, a teacher at Aerial School at the time, admitted that she had her own alien encounters 3 times after the incident, but she kept it private for fear of ridicule. This secrecy affected her mental health, leading to antidepressant use and even thoughts of taking her own life. On a June 2021 episode of BBC's Witness History, this event was called one of the most significant events in UFO history. UFOs, now officially known as UAPs, continue to be reported at an increasing rate to this day. If these so-called aliens truly exist, it seems they have a particular interest in Zimbabwe. A country also known for its rich spiritual traditions and its large number of prophets, Zimbabwe has even seen some of its top prophets claim that these beings will soon reveal themselves to the entire world. In particular, according to a prophet by Dr. Ian Ndlovu, known for his accurate predictions, every person will witness their appearance.
The Holy Spirit has been telling me for the past 2 weeks that the time for these strange appearances, it is getting very close now. Are these things unidentified flying objects? I don't know what you can call them, but people will be able to see them very clearly.
Dr. Ian Ndlovu has emphasized this prophecy repeatedly over the last few years, leaving many to wonder if this revelation is imminent, but only time will tell.
Oh, these are things that the Almighty God in His sovereignty will cause to appear, because people have been speculating whether there is life out there. But according to the Holy Bible, we know there is life outside our planet.
Well, what do you think? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more exciting videos like this one.